Hello, everyone, and welcome to Salon Float. This is the sixth installment of the virtual Gothic Funk Press reading series, launched in 2020 when remote reading series were the only way to do things. And then we realized we could have people from multiple time zones and multiple cities in one reading series. And so we just kind of have stuck with that for the last few years. My name is Connor Coyne. I am the director of Gothic Funk Press. Tonight, I am joined by Irene Sharon-Hodos, our resident mixologist, as well as S.C. Miguel, Christine Bourne, Reinhardt Suarez, our readers today. Comment moderation will be done by my lovely wife, Jessica. We're just really happy to be welcoming you to this young adult themed reading tonight. A couple installments ago, we did a poetry-focused reading, and I realized that while we had some children's lit and while we had some adult lit, we didn't really have much that was directed towards young adults and take as expansive a view of what a young person is or what an adult is for that matter. So I'll just start out by just plugging Gothic Funk Press for a moment here. Gothic Funk Press is Flint, Michigan's independent publisher. We've got a lot of programming going on right now in addition to the Salon series. Right now, the Paramanu Pentaquark Arts Journal is open to submissions. So if you are a writer or a poet or a musician or a visual artist of any sort, if you are really into sewing or a playwright, there might be a room for your work at the Paramanu Pentaquark. Go to gothicfunkpress.com and check it out. If you live in Flint, we are currently offering writing workshops for both teenagers and for adults. These are offered in partnership with the Flint Public Library. Go to the website for information on that. And we've actually got a ton of programming right now. And instead of belaboring that by going through it for the next half hour, just go to the website and check it out, gothicfunkpress.com. But we're going to jump right into it tonight. We will have our drink presentation, as always, by Irene, and then we will take it to our three readers who will share their work with us. And after that, special treat, we will have a question and answer session. So think of the questions that you might have about young adult literature and fiction, short stories, novels. Have those all stored up because you'll have a chance to ask those questions at the end. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Irene.
As I unmute myself. Hi, everybody. My name is Irene Hodes, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the float, hence the title of this wonderful salon for young adults. And for all of you young adults and former young adults, if you're all tuning in, you might be interested to know that the ice cream float has entirely medicinal origins. So before I start making this incredibly simple cocktail with 2 ingredients, unless you consider nostalgia or love a third and fourth ingredient, let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to do and then dig into the ice cream. And I hope that some of you got the recipe in advance and are also going to be drinking and eating huge amounts of ice cream. There you go. Connor's got some. An ice cream float is ice cream and a soft drink or carbonated water and syrup. And in New Zealand and Australia, you might be interested to know that they are called a spider. It is a common term. So order a spider next time you go to a diner in Auckland. And the origins of soda drinks, let's just put it that way, because soda drinks with milks and flavors and stuff started before the ice cream was added to it. And that is from the soda fountain. You guys might remember in the oldie days, have seen all sorts of movies and maybe even before that there were soda counters in the backs of pharmacies of all places. And that started off in the 1850s. Pharmacists wanted to be able to present tinctures and medicinal tonics. So they would mix up all sorts of medicines and herbs and spices and things to their patented sodas, including cocaine for the former teens who might be listening. We can do a whole thing on the Coke and Coca-Cola another time. And so that's how there were fountains in the backs of pharmacies. And over the years, they started putting tastier and tastier things in there, and it really appealed to people. So you could have chocolate and vanilla and all sorts of different things, lemons and milks to make a really delicious beverages. And eventually they started serving food and stuff in pharmacies. Weird, right? And in any case, the ice cream float started in the 1870s. It's debatable whether it was 1874 or 1876, but there was this guy named Robert M. Greene. And at some fair, it's also debatable if it was a local fair in Philadelphia or the World's Fair, he was running a soda fountain booth. And he was mixing up cream and soda and different flavors of syrups. Delicious. And he ran out of cream. A neighboring booth had ice cream. So he mixed it together, and it was so popular. He literally became a millionaire and patented this and did this for years. Amazing. That's how the ice cream got into the soda. Now, you guys, or most of you, or Connor is in Flint or in the Detroit area. And in my research, I discovered that you guys have something called a Boston cooler. Now, all over the country, there's lots of different names. Root beer floats are what I grew up with. And I know that they are sometimes called black cows or brown cows. Black cows, I know sometimes have a Coke float, have Coke with ice cream in them. I know they have purple cows and pink cows with grape soda or strawberry soda, all sorts of different things. And I'm going to make a non-dairy version as well that I really, really love with some non-dairy elements. But a Boston cooler is not from Boston. Typically, you guys have something called a Verner's float. And I had to order this from the East Coast in the mail because I could not find Verner's out in California where I am right now. So this came to me from far and away. And it is a mixture of Verner's ginger ale and vanilla ice cream. And there is a version that you blend it. Most people have it lightly blended, but it did start out clearly as an ice cream float as well. So who was Verner? Well, this is Dr. James Verner, who is, not coincidentally, Michigan's first licensed pharmacist. And Dr. Verner was making tinctures. He wanted to make a stomach tonic. So he put ginger and a whole bunch of other herbs and spices in oak casks, in barrels. And the mythological story goes, he went off to fight in the Civil War in 1862. And when he came back, this amazing, sweet, spicy, delightful concoction was there. His family says that he started experimenting with a recipe after he got back from the war, but in any case, he was this wonderful veteran and a pharmacist, and he made this delightful beverage that was supposed to be for your stomach. But it was so delicious that in 1866, he just started selling it. And he, of course, had a soda fountain of his own. And it was so popular that he started patenting it and selling it to other pharmacists, but they also had to buy his patented soda water. He wouldn't sell it without his water, so he had a bit of a racket there. And then started a factory, one of the oldest sodas that's still around. It's delicious. And why Boston cooler? Well, they thought it was from Boston Boulevard in Detroit because his original pharmacy was up close to there. Not the case. It might have come from your Boston Edison neighborhood. Also probably not true. It's vague. Because around the turn of the century, of the last century, they were using the term Boston cooler in several cities. Sort of like we would say black cow, right, is a little bit more ubiquitous. So they're not sure about the origins. However, Verner's in 1966 patented the term Boston cooler for their Verner's ice cream bar flavor. So the Boston cooler ice cream is patented. So without further ado, I've talked a lot and I want to get to the literature. I'm going to make one here for the first time. It's vanilla ice cream. Oh, dang, sorry. It's been melting out here for a while. I'm going to do 2 scoops. Following the recipe from online, guys, this is my very first Verner float, or Boston cooler as it is. So here I go. Ooh, it's getting all sorts of fuzzy and yummy. Oh no. Let's taste it. Let's do a stir. Oh my God, that's delicious. Detroit, thank you. And before I sign off, here is my vegan, dairy-free version. I've got some lemon sorbet. Now, I know that I wrote sherbet in the recipe online, but I learned last night from a dearest person that sherbet has dairy in it. So I'm taking that back, and I got some Italian ice, and I'm gonna mix it with some incredibly affordable island punch. Here we go. I've done this with orange juice before. And one of my favorite sodas that I never buy, Squirt, because I thought it was more interesting than a lemon lime or a Sprite. So I'm gonna do this for my wonderful lactose-free, dairy-free, vegan, but also incredibly unhealthy fruity float. And it tastes like an orange Julius. There we go. So let's go and hear some amazing literature. And I'm so thrilled to be here. Take it away, Connor.
All right, thank you, Aren. And I've got my Werner's float, and I'm ready to try it. And I'm still waiting for the ice cream head to kind of diminish a bit. That actually like blew my mind, partly because like I had always heard like that, you know, that like the Boston Boulevard version of events, and so I'm like shook. I'm trembling. I need to go and like confront my sources and say, you know, what are these vagaries you've been peddling? So I actually goofed up there at the beginning. I did not read Iren's bio, and rather than deprive you of her remarkable resume, I'm going to go ahead and share it now before we jump on to.
You don't have to do it. It's fine.
No?
No, you can just post it online afterwards, and we're good. I want to hear the literature. I'm
Okay.
Just a very person in disguise. So enjoy.
All right. Then at Iren's request, we will move along to Reinhardt. Reinhardt Suarez is a Chicago-born writer, editor, and raconteur, and has an MFA from the New School in New York City. He lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota with his wife, Kristen, his daughter, Morgan, and their feline overlord, Carl. He's written 2 young adult novels, Lords of Badassery and The Green Ray of the Sun, and most recently, he's been a writer for the storyline of the Magic the Gathering card game. He'd love it if you'd said hi at www.thereinhardtexperience.com. So, Reinhardt.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Is that good? Okay. So, yes, the most recent work that I have been doing has been for the Magic the Gathering card game. And so when Connor approached me with this opportunity, I said, how many times can people actually get to hear a reading of a Magic the Gathering story? So the answer will be at least one right now. So I'm going to read to you from the latest story that I penned for Magic the Gathering that had to do with, or that was associated with the most recent set of cards called Phyrexia All is One. And this is a story about a character named Tezzeret. And Tezzeret is a villain, a conniving, backstabbing villain. He is often referred to as the Starscream of Magic the Gathering. If people know what that reference is to, it really means that he's always been the second fiddle to the big head honcho bad guy, and he's always been put upon to do the dirty work. And in this case, Tezzeret has been doing the dirty work for this group of really terrible creatures called the Phyrexians. And the Phyrexians are these Borg-like biomechanical horror show things that want to take over the universe. And he, in order to rectify some very nasty health problems, signed on to their squad in exchange for a new body made of indestructible metal, because Tezzeret is half metal, half flesh. Of course, his employers decided to try to double cross him right after they gave him this body, but in kind of good measure, he double crossed them and now has gotten away. And he's gotten away by teleporting himself to his childhood home on a different world, on a world called Alara. So I will continue. I will take up right then in this short excerpt, and hopefully this goes okay. All right. Filth, darkness, desolation. Many words have been said of Tide Hollow, the forsaken underground where the Esper elite relegated the dregs who reminded them of their sins. Tide Hollow the heartless, Tide Hollow the unmerciful. The longer you live there, the longer and more complex the phrasing. Tide Hollow, who impales the skulls of the forgotten with spikes of machine perfection. Tide Hollow, whose plumes of trash fire soot gag the toxic hopes of the young, the acidic pleas of the old. Tide Hollow, with teeth like window shards, sarcophagus bones hollowed of marrow and force-fed to infants. Tezzeret, on his knees, dug between hunks of broken pavement and scraped up the dirt underneath. He brought the soot and soil up to his face, smelled the blood, the sick, and the hopelessness, and then he leaned back and howled with laughter. The poets could choke on their verses. For Tezzeret, there was only one word associated with Tide Hollow that truly resonated: home. Oi, he heard a voice say behind him. It echoed off the walls of the condemned buildings lining the grimy alleyway. Looks like someone's got too much of the piss. Probably don't have a lot left in your pockets, but we'll take what you got. Tezzeret turned his head to see a gang of cave brats, the tallest and oldest out front armed with a knife. He had the steely look of someone who had been on his end of a weapon before, who'd carried out forced transactions like those up in Vectus enjoyed their afternoon tea. Long ago, before planeswalking dragons, plane-churning confluxes, and biomechanical scourges, Tezzeret, dressed in the same tatters, bore the same scowl on his face that these youths now wore on theirs. I am at a moment of weakness, he said calmly. I will permit you to leave. I think we'll stay, thank you very much, said a girl, the lead boy's second in command. Tezzeret guessed. What are those things floating around him? The lead boy smirked. Magic. Decorations rich folks spend a fortune on. He jabbed his knife in Tezzeret's direction. Come on, give us your stuff and you won't get hurt. I have nothing for you. I'll be the judge of that, said the lead boy. You would judge me? What makes you think you're worthy? Got a knife in my hand, see? Yes, said Tezzeret. Then, in one movement, he turned, stood, and cast a spell to animate the knife in the leader's hand. It wrested itself from the boy's grip and then plunged into his palm, nearly severing his fingers entirely. Yes, I see. Aether Lich, the girl screamed, sparking a stampede, the lead boy holding his wrist as he scampered away. The gang scattered, its bigger members trampling over the smaller ones who made up the back ranks, leaving behind a lone, blonde child, pushed down into the gutter by his erstwhile fellows. The boy huddled against a nearby building, one that Tezzeret recognized. He brought himself to the threshold of his childhood home, the abysmal station he'd been born into. Why is this building boarded up? Tezzeret asked the boy. And what of the man who lived here? No one's ever lived here, as far as I know. Had his father died? It wouldn't have been surprising. When he was cursing other scrappers for stealing his rightful claim or screaming at his son to allay his frustrations, he was in his cups, babbling to the phantom of his dead wife, Tezzeret's mother, before passing out in a pool of his own vomit. Before he knew better, a young Tezzeret would wait until his father was asleep, then wipe the table dry and lay his father down upon his cot with blanket drawn. Imbecile! He'd merely enabled his father's cruelty toward him. Only when Tezzeret was older, after he'd learned about the power of mages, did he see the role he played in his own suffering. What is your name, boy? Estel, the young man stammered out. Come. Tezzeret tried to reshape his arm into a bent edge to pry off the wooden panels nailed across the doorway, only for his body to ignore his command. He grunted, realizing that for all the strengths of his new form, there were trade-offs. With time, he thought, as he tore his panels down as if they were scraps of paper. Inside didn't look much different from what he remembered. 2 rooms, one a kitchen area with a shallow fireplace and a table, and the other used as sleeping quarters. Both were stripped of anything of value. The only things visible, implying his father's existence, were bits of twisted metal, all cheap alloys, scattered across the floor, and a heavy cloak that smelled of mold and sawdust. But what of things invisible? Tezzeret pushed the table aside and, counting 3 tiles from the back wall, he inserted a finger into the crack between the 3rd and 4th. Underneath was a small metal door locked with a heavy deadbolt. Tezzeret ripped the door off its hinges, reached in, and pulled out a small wooden box with floral patterns carved onto its lid. This was his mother's handiwork, the last remnant of a hobby that gave her solace amid the squalor. He remembered hugging the box on the journey up to Lower Vectis to collect his mother's corpse, how his fingernail fit perfectly into the shallow grooves of the carving. He remembered her promise that morning to return with supper, a promise he supposed she'd intended to keep. Witnesses told a familiar tale. She'd been begging for alms when a wealthy guildmaster's wagon hit her and didn't stop. Of course, the authorities did nothing. Humiliation and death were common enough occurrences for downslopers like her. Long after, and armed with his seeker training, Tezzeret searched out his mother's killer, only to find that he'd died years before, peacefully, surrounded by his loving family. Tide Hollow, whose claws of rags and misery drag dreams to ash. "Do you know what this is?" Tezzeret asked Estelle after cracking open the box for the boy to see. Inside were metallic scraps of all shapes, nuggets, shavings, irregular threads. "Ethereum," Estelle answered, shriveling under the planeswalker's gaze. "This paltry amount is worth more than all the denizens of Tide Hollow combined. Anything that you are now or will be in the future." Tezzeret began to shape a spell, murmuring words he'd learned long ago as a member of the Seekers. "Its value is derived from its extreme rarity, its inability to be reproduced. At least, that's what you're told." He let his hand drop, the Ethereum suspended in the air, and watched as the liquid metal reformed into a thin square. "Those in Tide Hollow need little motivation to fight amongst ourselves for the scraps we're allowed to have. All the better for those above. It keeps us out of their way." Letters began to raise themselves onto its surface, Tezzeret's mind pressing the metal into a message. Tezzeret took the Ethereum, curled it into a tight tube, and placed it back into the box. He looked to Estelle and intended to place it in his hands when thunder tore through the air, the sound of steel doors being wrenched apart. Tezzeret ducked outside to see an angular crack, flaring with bright crackles of energy, breaking the cave ceiling. Tearing through it was a column of white material that he at first thought was a building falling through from the city above, but upon closer inspection, he spotted creatures moving across the column's surface, scampering down like insects to street level. Then he realized what he was looking at. Bone-white metal. The Phyrexians had arrived. "Too soon," Tezzeret snarled. He clutched Estelle's arm and dragged him inside the hovel. He forced the boy to take the box, then spotted the small dagger strapped to the boy's belt. "Give me your knife." With a shaking hand, Estelle drew the knife from its sheath, and Tezzeret grabbed it and looked it over. Cheap make, loose handle, chipped tip. Still, it would suffice for Tezzeret's ends. A beginner's spell solidified the knife's handle. Another filed the edge down until it was sharp and tapered. One last enchantment made it quasi-ethereal, such that its cutting edge could cleave through a well-forged sword. "The cistern at Bellows End," he said. "Do you know of it? There's a passage leading to a forgotten house in Upper Vectis." "Aye, we use it to watch the parades." "As I did in my youth." Go there. Stick to the shadow way, the narrowed passages. How do you know? Be quiet and listen. You are to leave the city, taking supplies as you come across them. Do not stop moving. If something gets in your way, use this. Tezzeret placed Estel's refashioned knife back into its sheath. Make your way to Bant. Bant? Follow the shoreline northward, keeping the silver wind at your back to guide you to Valoran. Approach the first outpost you see and find the knight decorated with the most sigils. Request an audience with Knight General Rafik and give him the box. Am I clear? The boy nodded, but his expression was one of worry and confusion, exacerbated by the shouts and screams, not to mention the inhuman roars from outside. What's happening? What were those things? Who are you? I am the one giving you a chance to live, he said. When you see Rafik, tell him that an ally of Elspeth Tyrell sent you. Tezzeret pushed Estel away, and the boy turned to leave. But before exiting, he looked back, nodded, and said, Thank you. Wasted words, he spat, heat rising behind his eyes. But, sir, just go, he screamed, prompting Estel to run out the door. Tezzeret stood, his body trembling. I have not fully recovered from the grafting, he told himself as he regained his composure. If the boy dies, he dies. Death would have been Estel's destiny anyway had he stayed in Tide Hollow. But if he managed to live, if he got word to the Knights of Bant that they alone possessed a way to defend themselves, a legion of angelic warriors, just as New Capenna once boasted, then Alara could become a quagmire, slowing the Phyrexian spread. All the more time to reestablish his networks, gain resources, and enact his plans. Tezzeret donned his father's cloak, a menial disguise, but it sufficed, and then, for the briefest of moments, stared back at the dingy hole where he was born and raised. Flecks of rotten wood and plaster rained down from the ceiling as the air filled with noises of slaughter and mayhem. A fitting goodbye, he thought, as he entered the blind eternities. Thank you.
Thank you, Reinhardt. Our second reader tonight is Christine Bourne. She is an ex-librarian from Cleveland who now manages scholarships and scholarship accessories in rural Minnesota. She struggled to get ChatGPT to write a decent author bio, but the robots couldn't get past librarian stereotypes, and they didn't know what to do with perimenopausal Daria Morgendorfer. For the last decade, she's tinkered with a set of interlocking stories called Rustworld Problems. Think the Archers Meet the Connors. Her current book is sort of if Shirley Jackson wrote My So-Called Life, and she hopes you will like her plot better than what ChatGPT came up with. Christine lives in a small, dark house with a husband and a cat, only one of whom is any use in a blizzard. Take it away, Christine.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, okay. So I do not have any books that you can buy, but my friend Kate Norris, who is on the live stream, has a wonderful book called When You and I Collide. That is a thrilling tale of love and loss and war and physics. So I encourage you to check that out. I asked her to put a link to that in the YouTube comments. And I will get started here. Let's see. So this story, which I've always called junk mail, has been rattling around in my head for about 25 years. But I've never really been sure what form it was going to take. Then last year, two things happened that brought it together. One was a much younger colleague asked the question, why is Gen X so hostile towards Gen Z for us wanting to take care of our mental health? And two, as you heard, I work as a scholarship program manager, and I read an essay where a girl wrote about how watching Buffy with her mom gave her insight into what her mom was up against as a young woman. So after I stopped feeling about 10,000 years old, I started writing this book. The story is set in the fictional Rust Belt city of Grantsburg during the 1994-1995 school year. This is the senior year for Claire Riley, my protagonist, who really wants to get out of Dodge and go to an expensive fancy person college. Claire's last year of high school, though, is somewhat unexpectedly becoming a psychological death by 1,000 cuts from a few different directions. And over the course of the book, Claire becomes increasingly lost in this imaginary world she's cobbled together from mythology and Wicca and populated by cemetery angels and characters from past lives and that kind of thing. So yeah, one of those forces that's sort of weighing heavily on Claire's mind is this deteriorating relationship with her somewhat inscrutable mother, which you'll see a little bit of in this scene. Just a bit of background info for this scene. Jason is Claire's boss at the nature company. And if you're of a certain age, you might remember the mall nature store with the whale sounds and the cry of the loon and the rain sticks. And Jason had strong-armed her and her boyfriend Stefan into agreeing to go on a Valentine's Day double date with him and his ex-girlfriend Molly, who he's trying to get back with, by threatening to take away Claire's weekend shifts, which he knows she needs in order to pay for college. Excuse me. And Mr. Rivlin, Claire's English teacher, has been a chief participant in the whole death by 1,000 cuts that Claire's been experiencing over the course of the year. Yeah, and if you don't know who Monty Python is, please use Wikipedia. And if you don't know what a video store is, you might be too young for this book. Anyway, okay. Valentine's Day was, as usual, nauseating. The JV cheerleaders held their annual rose sale in the cafeteria before school, crowded around by a pack of jocks tugging self-consciously at the bills of their baseball caps, which they technically weren't allowed to wear, but which Vice Principal Massengill never seemed to notice, invisible as halos. The roses would be delivered to the usual suspects during homeroom. Sometimes the popular girls would buy white roses for the unpopular girls, a gesture of no hard feelings. Hopefully you'll blossom someday too. Claire had never bought a rose, and she had never gotten a rose either. Like she always did, Claire wore black on Valentine's Day. Last period, Mr. Rivlin had them read what he'd apparently determined to be the greatest love scenes in American literature. The scene in An American Tragedy when Clyde Griffiths lets his pregnant girlfriend drown. The scene in A Farewell to Arms where Catherine dies in childbirth. Moral of the story, don't get yourself pregnant, he said as the bell rang. Heather P. giggled and fingered the red rose pinned on her Esprit sweater. Interesting reading, Miss Riley, Mr. Rivlin said as Claire passed his desk, last to leave the classroom. She clutched 10 stupid things women do to mess up their lives, which she'd made no secret of reading during the class period, to her chest. He poked it with a grubby cigar-like finger. There's hope for you yet, maybe. At home, next to her daily pile of junk mail, which was finally starting to slim down now that applications were in, college visits were done, and interviews were had, was a note in her mother's precise handwriting. Call Jason. Claire went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of calcium-fortified orange juice, her mom's new thing, even though her mother couldn't drink anything acidic, she insisted Claire drink it, and gave the dog a fresh rawhide chewy, which he absconded to the living room with, the ingrate. An old heart-shaped chocolate box was on the kitchen table. There'd be no chocolates in it. The box was about the same age as Claire, and her mother used it to store old greeting cards. Claire sat down with her OJ and opened the box. On top was a yellowed envelope with her mom's name, her name before she was married, typed on the outside. Claire unfolded the letter carefully. It was worn so thin at the creases that you could easily tear it in 3 neat pieces with no effort at all. A length of mummified Scotch tape fell off into the box, sending undoubtedly carcinogenic puffs of old tape glue straight into Claire's eyes. On behalf of the admissions office at Wellesley College, read the letter, we are pleased to admit you to the class of 1971.
The typewriter ribbon was wearing out, and the M key was misaligned. That much made sense to Claire as she sat blinking at the letter, cocooned in dim, dusty silence, but for the faint slurping and clacking of the dog's teeth on the rawhide chewy. Wonder if she changed the ribbon after this letter or the next one, Claire thought, zeroing in on the secretary's initials at the bottom of the page, RGH typed in lowercase, her actual name lost to the ages. Vocabulary word was pricking in Claire's mind, something from 10th grade. It remained elusive. Then, far away, the Cutlass engine cutting out, a door slamming, and a phone ringing somewhere. Somewhere more right word on the timeline than 1971. Hello, her mother's voice, breathless and annoyed. Yes, she is. Hold on. It's Jason. Didn't you call him back? Claire was still holding the letter. Her mother could see that. Mom? Mother brandished the phone at her. Are you taking this upstairs? Why didn't you? I don't have to tell you everything, you know, Claire, said her mother, slamming the lid on the chocolate box. Are you taking this upstairs or what? I have to start dinner. It turned out Jason's big Valentine's Day plan was off. Molly's sick, he said, and didn't offer anything else. Claire said she was sorry and called Stefan to tell him he was off the hook. Why don't you come over here? We can go rent a movie. My mom's going out wine dancing with her friend Brenda, the one who just got divorced. I've got her car. I'll come pick you up. Can we get something funny, like Monty Python kind of funny, or The Wicker Man? Whoa. Hang on, Claire. Are you okay? You sound weird. I think I need you right now. Give me 15 minutes. Conflagration. That was the vocab word pricking at the back of her mind. Then another one, incendiary. Her eyes burned harder when she closed them. Within Claire's private darkness flickered a light on the horizon. But it wasn't Prometheus bringing fire to illuminate the world. There were too many footfalls. They were too heavy and they were too fast. She could smell the torches and they were coming for her. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. And our final reader of the night, S.C. Magali, is an author and filmmaker. She's been profiled in USA Today, The Washington Post, and New York Newsday, and has appeared on NBC's Today Show and the CBS Evening News for her philanthropic and literary work. As a humanitarian, she's spoken on the USS Intrepid, at the NASDAQ opening bell, and to universities and doctors nationwide. She enjoys making connections all over the world. Magali was raised in the long grass of the Civil War, hunting for relics and catching fireflies along the banks of Bull Run. A shark tooth, flutes, and a flask are some of the items that hang from her wheelchair, and she had a fear of elevators until realizing this was extremely inconvenient. She lives with her family, which includes her parents, sister and brother, service dog, and definitely not service dog. This Is Not a Love Scene is her first published novel. I have to add that S.C. Magali has lots of other books too, but that is the book that this bio referenced. So, check that out as well.
All right. Hey, can you hear me? That's the tradition. Good. Yeah, so I am last and I am certainly least because these are just some fabulous people in this Zoom. And thank you so much for hosting me. It's a real honor. Thank you to Irene. That was an awesome drink concoction you had going on there. And Connor, I mean, you're my buddy. I don't know if you guys know this, but I met Connor because I'm a judge at the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. And I awarded Connor first place for his submission way back in, I don't know, was it 2019? Something like that. But it was well deserved. And so I just love him. And I'm very impressed by everybody here. I guess the only plug I'll give is I too would love to hear from anybody out there. Just drop me a line, go to my website, which is www.scmagali.com, which is the same as my name in the Zoom, and there should be a contact form there. So let's be friends. I'll just say that. But yeah, so I will be reading from This Is Not a Love Scene tonight. That is my YA romance, which was published by St. Martin's Press, an imprint of Macmillan. And to give you a little insight, so this is a story about a protagonist in a motorized wheelchair, much like myself. And she is deep in lust, I will say, with someone from her high school who she is doing a student film with. He's an actor. He's super into himself. He's a bit aloof. He can be a jerk, but she thinks he's just the hottest thing in the world. So she is really, really pining for him. But she has a friend named Casey, who's been her friend for a long time. And Casey may not have, he may not be like, 6'2" and buff and all that. But he's very, very sensitive to her needs. And he sees a trailer for a movie coming out called You Before Anyone, which is about someone in a wheelchair. And so he thinks, that'd be a perfect thing to invite Maeve to for maybe a date. So he invites her out, and this is an excerpt from that chapter. So we'll see where it goes. We wheeled towards Theater 5 and looked around at the cinema. Popcorn makers rumbled like a rainstorm. The smell of oily butter made the air salty and thick. I left tire tracks on the freshly mopped tile. The yellow wet floor signs were still out. Down the hall, we passed my favorite part of the theater, the movie posters, all framed and illuminated with bulbs around the rim. I loved how they bared action and romance and thrill in one big augmented collage, and the director's name was a little tiny line of text at the bottom. It was like the directors were saying, this, I am all of this, every little part of life, real and unreal. I wanted to be all of that and more. KC was unusually quiet. Are you nervous for this movie? I joked and beamed at him. Nah, he said, a pause. How did the editing turn out with Elliot? Not good, I groaned, but it was fake. Not a single part of me was upset that we had to reshoot Cole. I've been bouncing on giddiness as if a blow-up castle were in my stomach. We got to retake the scenes with Cole because I'm explicitly reflected in the glass. Casey blinked. How'd we miss that? Right? I said. We approached Theater 5, the banner You Before Anyone over the door. Casey jogged forward on his white gait and pulled open the door for me. I dove inside the darkness. The temperature dropped, AC blowing in nice and cool. I could hear Casey's gentle pat on the carpet behind me as we ascended the ramp to the main theater level. Previews splashed light on us. The theater was packed with silhouettes tossing back popcorn, wrestling their hands in the bag, and slurping barrels of Coke. I tensed up as I scanned the 2 handicapped accessible seats. My heart twisted. I frowned. As usual, 2 able-bodied people were already sitting there, a normal couple on a date, I assumed, maybe 19 or 20. They were lounged back, dressed casually. He had his hand on her wrist. She was wearing long lashes. God, I hated having to be the dick. I acted quick before Casey had time to get uncomfortable, or ask if I should go get a manager, or even say, want to go to another movie? I neared the couple and dropped my voice to a whisper. Hey, so sorry, I said to them. Oh, the guy said, sorry. He rose quickly, and the girl followed a beat after. Casey lingered in the background. This happened a lot. I mean, can you blame them? These are nice seats. Private. How often do disabled people come and take the fun out of disabled spots? I remember texting Mags about this once after Ellie and I went to see the new Star Wars. Maeve. So these guys were in my seat again. Mags. Ugh. Maeve. Yeah, I felt really bad. They had to take the first row. Why do you feel bad? Because I'd be annoyed if I were them. That's stupid. No, it's not. I told Elliot I'd be right back, and I bought them both sodas. Maeve, you don't need to buy people things because they were in the handicap seats, and you're handicapped and you made the move. She tried to be as thorough as possible. Well, I did. But yeah, maybe it was a little insensitive of them. It was. If I were able-bodied, I can't say I wouldn't try the same thing. Get away with whatever you can. I still don't know where I stand on the issue. Casey nestled into the seat next to my open space. He didn't look over or say anything more. It struck me how sweet this was. No one else saw the trailer for this movie and thought of me. He'd invited me out of nowhere. Then the theater trembled as a preview for Exploding Car Chase 3 came on, and I couldn't help but study Casey's eyes reflecting the blue light of the screen. He was more youthful than I gave him credit for, his face kinder. His sideburns came down just a little farther than average, reminding me of a John Lennon vibe. I had a weird urge to reach out and lay a hand on him. Something on the screen amused him because he huffed and crossed his arms before I could do it. I guess I should have paid more sociable attention to what we were watching. When I turned my head, I saw him. I could never mistake that look, that beard, the way he seemed to fill even a large auditorium. Green, the following preview light, backlit him and threw shadows on all the rough grooves of his face and hair. His rugged hand held an energy drink can. Cole Stone was walking to his theater seat. Alone? Cole, someone whispered hissed behind him. He spun and smiled as two kids joined him. One dude and another girl Cole's age. I squeezed my armrest. Please don't walk over here, I thought. Wait, why? What was I ashamed of? Cole ambled to their row of seats ahead of me and sat. His tallness, even seated, made him the most protruding silhouette of the row. That girl with him didn't make contact, and he didn't do anything chivalrous like stand until she was seated. Were they together or not? What the hell was the situation? Siblings? Friends with amazing benefits? When the screen sank to black and stayed there, the crowd hushed. Nothing but the sound of hands digging into popcorn. Suddenly, with Cole in the room now, I coiled. I noticed the viewers in the rising seats on either side were glancing sideways at me, no doubt taking in the endearing irony of someone like me seeing a movie like this, representing my people. I shuddered. I felt like a lobster in the tank. Rubber bands trapped my muscles, so I swallowed and tried to jiggle my foot on the footrest, tried to shift, tried to tell my body to move and make it listen. I wanted to feel like less of a lobster. You okay? Said Casey. I turned to him. He was staring at me. I flashed a smile. Yes. He lingered his gaze on me for a moment. I didn't think he believed me, but he turned back to the screen and the movie played. I tried to get lost in the story, or at least the heathery colors of Scotland that reminded me of an enormous plaid quilt laying out over rolling hills. It seemed the film would be just as I anticipated from the trailer. The paralyzed rich man in a motorized wheelchair donned his dashing Scottish accent, and he and his American caretaker fell in love. They spun themselves into one awkward situation after the next, most of which I could relate to, getting wheels stuck in mud, having to address the uncomfortable, who's going to come into the woo with me? I should have been paying attention. Instead, I studied the back of Cole's head the whole time. How did he feel about this? When they portrayed the man limply being dressed, Cole didn't move. When the heavy wheelchair needed to be pushed up a steep hill, he scratched his forearm. When the man confessed his self-hate because of the disability, Cole didn't raise a hand to dry his eyes. He just watched. Just watched. Maybe he was dragged here by the other two, and the only thing on his mind were getting some $8.50 nachos at the counter. Or worse, maybe he was thinking of me, with pity, and that helpless feeling, like you just can't wrap your mind around something. My God, you deserve to be loved like everyone else, they say. But it just can't be from me. I was used to men thinking, saying, and showing that on their faces. For the remainder of the film, I leaned back and tried to rest. Spoiler alert. The disabled Scottish man decided life in a wheelchair was not worth living, so he performed medically assisted suicide to the heartbreak of his attendant lover. When the brightening theater lights lifted everyone from their seats, tear-streamed faces shined. People gathered their things and sniffled, speaking in soft, awed voices. No one looked at me, almost as if they couldn't. My arms were crossed. I stared hard at the rolling credits and even forgot Cole was there. My brow was low. Huh. I looked over at the voice. KC was still too. His mouth was twisted in a contemplative pucker. Well, that's not what I expected, he said. But he didn't sound too traumatized for my sake. I appreciated this. It was all right, I said. The guy was kind of hot. Oh yeah, said Casey. If I were gay, I'd be into him. His confidence assured me he wasn't. Casey rose and stretched. He scratched the back of his neck. A line of people in the row ahead of me stood. Cole was with them, and my panic returned like tennis balls shelling me in a junior batting range. Hey, I said to Casey, I'm going to go get some water. I wanted to leave fast before Cole could see me. Why was I so embarrassed? Maybe because of the hundreds of films I see a year, Cole had to catch me in this one, as if this is what I was all about. Yeah, said Casey, I'm kind of thirsty too. This place reeks of salt. He tossed his head for me to follow and headed for the exit on the opposite side. Cole was walking up. I made to move with Casey, cursing the loud click of my wheelchair motor coming to life. Too loud. To my right, in the hallway leading to the exit, Cole stopped. My throat jammed. Heat flushed to my face, and maybe some other places too. For one moment, across the theater, Cole turned and his gaze locked with mine. He blinked, eyes a little confused, as if not sure it was me. An instant later, his buddies came up to him and patted his broad shoulder. They herded him on. I took in breath and swiveled towards KC, who was tying his shoe. He popped back up. Let's roll, he said. Outside the theater, I threw away the ticket stub and the receipt. I noticed KC slide his into his pocket. Streetlights and headlights blurred out my window as Dad cruised me home. I held onto the cold metal ramp to my right as we merged onto a new highway. So, did you like the movie? Dad glanced into the rearview mirror. It was okay. The highway hummed beneath the car wheels. Just okay? I sighed and clicked my phone to darkness. Dad, if you were a burden on your family, would you want to die? Dad was silent as he held the wheel. Like, for your family, I emphasized. Like, to free them. Maybe, if I thought I was really hurting quality of life for you and Mom. My stomach nodded. Yeah, I said. Why? I don't know, I said. I didn't feel like admitting to myself that the movie might have bothered me. What made you think of that? I hesitated. Maybe I could make the same argument about myself. Dad's brows pulled together. Concern clouded his face. I think he gripped the wheel harder because his knuckle was whitened. Don't. What? I said. You're not a burden. I gazed out the window and tried to breathe against the weight in my chest. What would you do? I said. A pause. What would you do if I decided to commit assisted suicide in a hospital bed and everything? Dad's answer was immediate. It even shook. Then I'd be laying down with you. To comfort me? No, said Dad, taking the same injection.
All right. Thank you, all three of you, for those wonderful readings. I've been kind of official up until now, but well, first things first, there's a bit of a lag on the YouTube feed. So this is your chance to ask these authors questions. You can ask them questions about young adult fiction. You can ask them questions about writing in general. You can ask them questions about their books. You can ask any of them. You can ask somebody in particular. But I also just wanted to say, kind of leaning on and I didn't really connect this until just a moment ago, is that I have known Christine and Reinhardt and Shay, all of them, for years now, and they're not only like brilliant and talented writers, but they're also very warm and generous people, all three of them. So you have been invited into their worlds in various ways, and I think, I encourage you to take them up on that take them up on that offer, whether as a reader or a correspondent. So yeah, let's see what questions we have. If you have any questions about anything in the world, go ahead and put it in the chat there, and I will be on the lookout for that. And so we're not waiting for too long. I did have a couple questions prepared, so maybe I'll launch a softball question while we're waiting to see what people put in. So so the first question is, and this, I get variations on this from my writing students at the public library. They don't say it in so many words, but I think this is what it boils down to. Is writing fun? So who wants to take a stab at that one?
Nope. It's not. It's a work. No, I've actually had this conversation recently with my friend Beth, who I think is on the live stream, that there's certain types of writing that are fun and certain types of writing that are not fun. And I think you need to find a balance between that. Like, certain parts of writing this book have been super fun, like writing the scenes in the mall nature store are really fun. Like writing the scenes where someone's having a panic attack, not fun. Substack, super fun. Writing stuff at work, not fun. You know what I mean? So I think you have to have you have to strike that balance a bit. And writing with other people can also be super fun. So
I always say that a prerequisite of being an author is arrogance, which I pass with flying colors. But part of that means that you love to read your own writing. and you love to read it to an audience. And so that part will always be fun. So I would say that if you're struggling, just look forward to those moments where you're heard and you're appreciated for your voice and what you write. I think that writing was much funner for me when I was more naive about writing, when I had no criticism, I had no editors rejecting me. I thought I was the best thing in the world. And that's definitely like a honeymoon phase when you first start writing. In that honeymoon phase, I was very productive though. I always tell people that before I got a traditional publishing contract with Macmillan, I had to write literally 1 million words. I added up all the words I'd ever written in my manuscript, and it was 1 million. So during that super naive fun phase, I was very productive. I learned a lot. It was great. I wrote like a 70,000 word novel in 2 weeks. It was fantastic. And then things get harder when you get older, when you get more experience. You write slower, I think, because you're more aware of the issues you need to work on and work out. And I think that's just natural. So I encourage people to, find ways to keep it fun in the sense of, if you have a scene that you're thinking of that you're like really excited to get to, write it out of order. Write it right now. You don't need to wait till you get to that scene. Just write it right now. You have something on the page, and other things will fill in around it. So.
And I would say, yeah, in agreement with everyone else, certain aspects can be fun. I found for myself that the more I cared about what I'm writing, the less fun it was, because I put much more pressure on myself to get it to this kind of platonic ideal that I had in my head. But I think it's always fun when it's out there and people can read it and people can think about it and talk about it, especially like if you're able to see when they're talking about it. That's one of the unique aspects of writing for like a large IP, which is whether you like it or not, people are going to have opinions on it. And sometimes they're going to have very strong opinions on it. You just kind of have to have fun with, like, you just had a take on it, a take on a character or a theme or something that maybe other people didn't agree on. And you just kind of have to just see it as kind of this funny confluence of events. So yeah, like, take the fun out of it that you can, whether it's you're in the scene and you're writing it because you're actually having fun. You're in the scene, your characters are doing fun things, or take fun in like a bunch of strangers talking about what you're writing and like coming up with really cool ideas. Whatever it is, if there's no aspect of it that it's enjoyable, I have in the past, and I would suggest in the future, that maybe think about spending time doing something that has some aspect of enjoyability. But if some part of writing is fun, I do think it's worth the other stuff that's not so fun.
Those are wonderful answers, and they all kind of like, I feel like they've got a similar like vision to them, but they came at it from very different angles. So that was really cool to hear. Still, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so you're going to have to suffer through another one of mine. And this one's maybe a little bit more heady. So if you go to the bookstore, and just for everybody watching, our three writers here today, I don't think any of the three of you write exclusively young adult fiction. You write in a variety of genres and modes. You were sharing YA with us tonight. So understanding that, if you go to the bookstore, most fiction genres, be it mystery or horror or fantasy or science fiction, are defined by what the writing is about or how it is written. But young adult is defined by who it is written for. So my question is, one, what do we think of having that sort of a definition for a literary genre? In other words, it's the audience that defines it. What are the advantages and disadvantages of that? And how does that affect the way you approach writing fiction for young adults? Did I just kill the vibe?
No, it's a tough question. I think we're thinking. I guess I'll volunteer as tribute and try to take a crack at it. Yeah, that was a very sophisticated question to throw at us. I think one thing that I keep in mind as a young adult writer is, attention spans. That has changed. That's been a trend that has changed throughout all literature, not just young adult. And that attention spans are getting shorter is not an insult to anybody. It's not saying that young adults are less smart or less capable. In fact, I think that all literature should move towards the snappiness, the writing style of young adult, because it's just so graspable, it's so approachable, and it's so good. It's so good in that way. It's like a film. One thing about what you said is that you find a lot of variety in the genre when you have young adult being categorized as a target audience. You have young adult fantasy, you have young adult sci-fi, you have young adult mystery, you have like everything. And so I think that that's great for young readers because they can explore a bunch of interests and trust that every book that they choose with a different interest, it's going to be written in a similar fashion that's approachable and that's readable and that's interesting and that's fun. Again, I sort of wish it would be like that for all literature, because you move into adult literature and it becomes a lot more pigeonholed into the genre, and you got to like really be experts in that genre to be able to grasp it and to walk away with a healthy stack of books to read for your next beach trip. But yeah, so I love the genre. I will defend the genre day and night. I think it's some of the best writers out there are young adult, and I'd love to see more of that young adult style touch other genres. What do you guys think?
I think, the history of young adult started very much as a marketing thing. And which is why, as if we see it as a genre, it really spans all these other genres, young adult, and then you could kind of bifurcate according to that subgenre. And I think it's very handy for both the readers and people wanting to buy books for, as presents, to see, okay, this is a set of books that has this age group in mind. It's not that it's limited to that, but this age group in mind, and from there you can kind of derive a certain style in general. But the thing is, I review YA books for the ALA, and in that time that I've been doing that, I've seen the gamut from stuff that I would sit back and say, this is not, this is like heady, complex, the prose is not easy, to stuff that is almost like, to the other end, it's just like more middle grade and fun and just very much about kind of younger ages growing up versus, some very heady sci-fi or very heady fantasy. In that, by and large, it's just a really cool playground for writers to write in, and a really cool space for readers to have. When you physically go into the bookstore, you just have this really wonderful section where a fan of young adult writing can just go in and turn 360 degrees and have all this stuff at their fingertips. And it is harder. I think it does show us, at least marketing wise, how maybe some of these other genres should maybe go the direction they should go toward. For example, I like literary fiction, but what does that mean? Is there a literary fiction section in the bookstore that means anything? I don't know. There's no hint of what that really means. So I have a harder time if I'm just someone off the street. I'll have a harder time figuring out, all right, I want something. What is here? If I go to young adult, I have a much easier time finding something really cool by an author who's very targeted, at that age level, or at certain genres, certain styles. So, this is my rambling way of saying I agree with you. But yeah, I think it's been a really cool evolution in the last, even just in the last 15, 20 years. So
I was just going to add to that because I used to be a young adult librarian, and that was actually in my mind. It was like a couple of years ago, but it was actually like 20 years ago now. But the audience for young adult has really shifted over time. I think more middle grade, what we would think of as middle grade, to teenage, to like actual young adults, like in their 20s, and now sometimes in their 30s are reading YA. So it's different. It's just not, it's kind of a plastic genre. It changes over time. And I would really like to see, I think I'm not really writing in young adult so much as what I would characterize as something that would be qualified for the Alex Award, which is from the Young Adult Library Services Association, and it's adult oriented books that are appealing to teenagers. So you can just Google Alex Awards and see what kinds of books are being published in that area. I think my aim in writing this book is somewhat not totally aimed at like 100% young adults, but I kind of would like people to read this book. I would like people my age. I would like women in their 40s, for example, to read this book and see sort of their origin story and maybe understand why they are the way they are, and for their daughters to read this book and understand maybe why their mom is the way she is. So I'm really looking to cross the Gen X, Gen Z kind of boundary here, because I think there's an interesting generational interplay going on there.
I'll second that. I'm Gen X and I've got a Gen Z kid. We're at an hour, actually an hour and 7 minutes, but we did get a wonderful question from Amber, and so I want to maybe share that, and that will be a good note for us to close on. So Amber writes, how much do you consider parents or other adults when writing for YA audiences? And actually, Christine, you kind of have spoken to this a bit. Amber says, I feel like when I was growing up, adults mostly ignored YA, but not so much now.
I mean, when you ask about when I write, do I think of whoever's parents might like read it over their shoulder? I don't think about it at all. maybe I should. So the contemporary YAs that I have written, I really took pains to try to capture a voice, a narration, and dialogue that felt real to the high school students I was teaching at the time. And sometimes those wonderful, delicate students swear like sailors, and so I didn't feel right in not portraying that as authentically as I could. Would that maybe get some parents upset? Maybe, but I didn't care. So that's I guess my answer.
Any final thought?
I remember, being the YA librarian 20 years ago and fielding complaints from parents about books that were on the shelf. And it does not compare, I think, to what YA librarians today are going through with fielding complaints from not just parents, but random community members who have, or maybe not even community members, maybe people who are just sort of sicked on them by social media campaigns. So I would be lying if I said that did not have somewhat of a chilling effect on, while I'm writing this stuff. Maybe I am sort of thinking down the line of how that might affect me or someone else or the librarian who's flogging this book. But at the same time, I also kind of don't care. Like, that's just, we can't just not write books because somebody might get mad about them. So
Amber, all I can say is I worry about my parents reading my books. So that's about the extent of it. But as for other parents out there, no, I don't think of it at all. And I think that that is an important thing, actually. I think that we need to keep it real. We need to have so much respect for our young adult readers and what they can take and what they're feeling and what they're going through. And it's very clear when a YA writer does not have that respect for the audience. And I never want to be that. I never will be that. So, you know, absolutely, you know, there are wonderful parents out there that are watching out for your best interest. And I hope that every young adult person out there has that. But what I write is not contingent on that. So that's my answer. Maybe it's a controversial one, but I'll take it.
Well, I think all of the answers that we heard have been thoughtful and just you know, rich and as rich as your readings. So I just want to once again you know, thank our three readers. Thank you, Ren. Thank Jessica for moderating, and we'll be back next time. But yeah, everybody stay warm and safe.